Carson, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, Zach, it's such a privilege to be with you. I know we have worked hard to get to this moment, and man, am I just so excited, so honored, and I just feel really blessed to be able to be a part of this conversation. I'm really excited about where it's going to go.
Man, I am so excited as well. As you mentioned, we've been kind of hitting and missing, both running 100 miles an hour recently. But what a blessing it is to finally have the opportunity just to unpack a little bit more of your story, a topic that you're very passionate about today. You know, as we begin, I want to give you a brief introduction. You're the director of Overflow, the college ministry of Port City Community Church in Wilmington, North Carolina, which serves over 500 college students each week. You're also the founder of Hope Changes Us, where your deep yearning is to carry hope to every corner of the world so that each person can experience its impact. Carson, with all that you have going on, I know you're being pulled in so many different directions. I'm just interested up front, man. What is the driving or kind of the fueling factor that just keeps you fighting this good fight?
There's so many things that could go into that bucket. My wife would tell you I'm like the Energizer bunny that just doesn't stop. You know, like I'm constantly coming up with new ideas. I told her actually not too long ago, I was like, hey, I don't think I have enough energy. And she's like, that's wrong. Like that, you
Right.
have way too much energy. But I mean, I love the question because it makes me kind of even zoom out a little bit on my own life and like think about it. And the couple things that come directly to my mind, a couple of years ago, I was spending some time with the Lord, and I wrote down 3 words at the top of my journal that felt like ordinary Christian type words. You know, some
Right.
people would call it like Christianese, you know, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, those are things that only Christians say. But it really became like a life motto for me, and it's Jesus changes everything. Not some things that sometimes. Jesus changes absolutely everything. And now it has been the heading of every journal entry that I have made since then. Like every day, like this morning, I got up to spend time with the Lord. I write the date, and then right underneath that, the first thing that my hand writes in the day is that reminder that Jesus changes everything. And several years ago, a book changed my life by Bob Goff, Everybody Always. I read the
Yep.
book, and I cried and I cried and I cried because I realized that I had been living out my faith in all of the wrong ways.
Hmm.
And it was like my road to Damascus moment where
Yep.
I felt like God was like, bro, what are you doing? Like, Zach, I don't know how God talks to you,
Yeah.
but when God talks to me, it's like the grandfather that's like your best friend. Like, my
That's right.
boy, like, come on. And
Yes.
that book like invigorated me with a great sense of like, man, I want to go love people like Jesus loved people. And I think that is like my calling. I mean, I know that's my calling. By the way, Matthew records what Jesus said, right? But like at the end of the day, like I need to fill myself up with God's Spirit so that I can live out God's calling on my life. It's the only way I'm going to be able to do it. And then in every corner and every room in the world that I find myself in, I always find somebody in need of hope. Like every single time. I've never met somebody, I don't know about you, Zach, but I've never met somebody that says, I've got enough hope.
Right. I've never met a person like that either.
I've never felt that way. You know, like
Right.
on my highest of highs in my life, like I've never gone, yeah, I'm good. I don't need any more, which was needed anymore. So that's where my idea for like, okay, why don't I just build a movement called Hope Changes Us? Because when we latch on to the hope of Jesus, we are changed, and I think in a really beautiful way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what comes to my
100%.
mind.
I love that, man. Those 3 words, Jesus changes everything. And as you're talking about hope, right, changes everything, because hope is a person. That's why I love working in this Christian mental health space, because it's that idea, like you said, a lot of people are just desperately seeking hope, encouragement, right, motivation in some way, shape, or form. And when you know the ultimate source of hope and strength himself, it really does change everything for you. It gives you this newfound sense of confidence, this newfound sense of freedom, and it really does kind of impact the trajectory in every facet of your life. And man, that's just a great word just to kick off our time together today. Jesus changes everything. But man, as we kind of keep transitioning, how I really heard about you from the get-go, I got to give a big special shout out to a coworker, a good friend of mine, Mr. Kyle Sutton. Kyle is the GOAT. He's the man, if anybody knows him. Such a kind dude, such a hard-working guy, a man of character and integrity. Thankful for you, Kyle, for connecting the two of us. But he sends me your messages like pretty often. And so one of them really,
Zach.
no, I have absolutely loved them. I've loved unpacking them. They have impacted my life personally, so I want to thank you for that. But a message that really stuck with me was the very first one he sent me, and it was titled "Don't Settle" from the Power of Becoming series. And I thought to myself, man, as we talk about this, working in that psych space, a lot of times, what is the first thing that people talk about? I want to become the best version of myself. But it's like, huge question, Carson. What does that even look like, right? What does this process of becoming really look like to you?
Yeah, I love the statement because I'm a highly disciplined person in the sense. Let me actually like edit that a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to be a highly disciplined person, right? Like if I'm being really honest, on the day of this recording, my alarm went off at its normal time, and I hit snooze like 5 times because I was tired and I skipped the gym. And I've been feeling guilty about it all day long.
You want to hear the truth? Same here, brother.
Okay,
literally
cool.
The exact same thing.
So if you're listening and you took a rest day from the gym, you're in good company. Yeah, and it's a good thing because it means you're still human. So you're doing okay. You're doing okay. But I love the idea of, man, I want to be the best version of myself. Like when I think about, for me, like I want to be the best version of Carson. But I ran into the reality not too long ago that becoming the best version of yourself isn't in the Bible. Like it's just not. Like if you look for a verse that supports that idea, or you look for that exact wording, you're going to look through all 66 books and you're just not going to find it. What you will find is becoming more like Jesus. Like
That's right.
Jesus is the example. Jesus is the model. Jesus is the exact representation of God. Thank you to the writer of Hebrews for giving us that language. Like that's the goal. So when I hear people go like, I need to be the best version of me, I was like, well, set your sights higher, right?
That's right.
Like, because the author and perfecter of all of creation said, hey, come and follow me. Come imitate me. And yes, you're going to fall short, but that will not change how I feel about you. What a beautiful reality. And when we make it all about us, we actually settle for a secondary version of existence, in my opinion. And I have a reminder on my phone, and it hits me at 7 o'clock every morning. It's one of those reminders that I end up having to hit snooze on every time. But it's, my life will not be the best that it can be until it's not all about me. That my life will just not be the best that it can be until it's not all about me, until I am not the sun of the universe, right? Where I look for everybody to orbit around me and me becoming the best version of me. Like, think about how self-centric that is. Like our whole world becomes about us, which means our world becomes as big as the shoe print that we leave on planet Earth. And that's not big enough for me. Like, that's just not. So when I think about like what's actually behind that statement, I think about the idea that what is true that I love about that is that like who we are becoming matters more than what we are doing. I know a lot of people that have a lot of to-do lists. They're like, I want to do this and I want to do that and New Year's resolutions and all these things. And I'm like, well, who do you want to become? Like, who do you want to be? Like at the end of your life, when you look back and you tell the story of your life, what story do you want to tell? Like, do you want to tell a story where you made your entire life about self-improvement? Or do you want to tell a story about how you made your entire life about following Jesus? And I can't help but get, away from the idea that like Jesus came for us to be more like him, not some perfect idealistic version of ourselves that every time we fall short, we feel bad about ourselves.
Man, I loved that statement. My life will not be all that it could be until it's not all about me, right? And it's this idea of setting our gaze, setting our sights on something above, right? Not becoming the best version of myself, becoming more like Christ, and being committed to that process really of progress. Because faith, like a relationship, it takes work, it takes progress, it takes process, right? You have to be committed to it, discipline. And that's kind of where I want to transition here now. When I think of this process of becoming, or this process of progress in general, I think of words like habits. I think of words like discipline, so on and so forth. I even mentioned right here in the prep, right, that Amazon, one of the most popular books on Amazon still today is Atomic Habits by James Clear, right? The book was released back in 2018, still is #1 on the Amazon charts. And if you look at really any of the books in the self-help categories whatsoever, they do kind of all fall into habits, choices, and discipline. For you, Carson, speak for a second to the importance and the significance of being able to live a life, right, that is built on healthy habits.
Yeah, I mean, the quality of your life is a result of your habits, right?
Yeah.
Good or bad. If you've got good habits, then you're going to be living a more healthy life. That's not to be confused with a perfect life, right? And I think that that's where the two things get sideways. And your point about Atomic Habits being at the top of the bestsellers list, very consistently for quite some time now. One, that's because the book is fantastic. And if you've not read it, go ahead and get it. I've never met James Clear. He's not paying me to say this. I'm just telling you, you should get the book. You should read it, and you should let it challenge you. And then you should sign up for his emails, because his emails, Zach, I don't know if you get them, but they're the most annoying thing in the world, because you get it and you read it and you're like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? But they're annoying in a good way. But the thing that I've come to realize for all of the Jesus followers listening, what we do habitually determines how we experience God relationally every single time. What we do habitually determines how we experience God relationally. And I would even add any other person to that sentence. Like, what you do habitually in your marriage determines how you experience your husband or your wife, right? Like, if you habitually come home and you ignore them and you just do what you want to do, you jump on the couch and you turn on Netflix, that's going to experience the relationship that you experience with your spouse. And I think that that's where the idea of habits is so compelling, right? Because when you think about like the concept of a habit, it's what we like are doing on autopilot. And I love this Duke University study that came out not too long ago. I came into contact with it through another author named Craig Groeschel, pastor of Life Church out in Oklahoma, in his book called The Power to Change. Another fantastic book, would highly recommend. But he talks about this study found that 40% of the decisions that we make actually come from our subconscious habits. Wow. And that was like a light bulb moment for me.
Yeah,
because I was
that's a huge percentage.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I'm like, that's where all my life is going. Like that all these goofy decisions that I'm making, what if they actually were born out of this subconscious part of my life that's informed by my habits? And that's where I've worked really hard in the mornings to not let snooze be the thing that I do. And yes, I failed at it this morning. But this is good. This is therapy for me. I'm talking it out. But like my tendency this morning was to feel guilty for hitting snooze, right? And why is that? Like, the more that you dig into that, I think that there's something in my kind of psyche that says I am bad if I make bad decisions. And I think that comes from the idea of like, I've got to be perfect to be considered good. But the beautiful idea of habits is when you make habits like your goal, you can win every time, in the sense of like, okay, well, I didn't get up this morning to go to the gym. I hit snooze. So what can I do today to have a habit of physical exercise? Oh, I can go for a walk in between meetings. I can go to the gym tonight because I'm making a habit of disciplining my body. Like that becomes a simpler thing. It's not necessarily easier because it's going to take time. But I do love in there, James Clear talks about how habits, are centered around cue, craving, response, and reward. And I think, just considering for a second, like, what are you relying on to be your reward in life? That's a question that we all need to wrestle with. And we probably need to wrestle with it every day, because a lot of the times, like, we're disappointed with the direction that our life is moving, but the direction of our life is determined by like what we are relying on as a reward. Like if success or fame or status or that job or that degree is the ultimate reward that's going to bring us happiness, then we're in trouble. We're in the story that Jesus talks about for the man who built his house on the sand and the man who built his house on the rock. Like when our reward is anything else except for following Jesus forever and ever and ever, then we're building our house on the sand. And we've got to get away from that if we want to live a healthy life.
And that goes back to what's kind of our gaze, right, transfixed on. And I think a big question that we've, mentioned time and time again, and it's a big question a lot of people have written books about. My dad actually wrote a book titled this, right, why do I do the things I do, right? Why do I love? Why do I feel? Why do I act the way that I do? And as you mentioned, sometimes what begins to happen is we find ourselves, right, questioning or falling into these feelings of guilt and or shame because we have a lot of these I should statements. This is what you're mentioning and throughout that message, right? That, man, I should have worked out this morning. I should eat better. I should drink less soda, right? I should read my Bible more. I should be, right? All of these different things. And then when we fall into this I should kind of funnel, you can see how people can begin to spiral out of control and just fall into that guilt and so on and so forth. So for you, you talk about this messy middle, and I'm interested for you to kind of expound upon that and just kind of unpack it for our listeners and myself today.
Yeah, I think we're all stuck in the messy middle because we all feel like we're in process, right? Like if we were to sit down and we were to have coffee and I were to ask, like, well, how's it going in your life? Like what's the condition of your life? You would probably tell me some like good things and some things that you were enjoying about your life. And then at some point in the conversation, you go, well, I'm working on this, or I'm trying to get better at this. And I think that space is actually so beautiful because if we look at the Gospels and we look at the people that Jesus invited to be in his inner circle, if you were to sum up their life, they were stuck in the messy middle. Like they were stuck in between like what actually like matters most and what they like enjoyed or like what brought them temporary satisfaction or reward. And I think that idea really boils down to this idea of what's ultimately important versus what's immediately satisfying. And then like you said in the beginning, I spent a lot of time with college students. And one of my favorite questions to ask is like, okay, so like where you are in life, are you choosing what's ultimately important or what's immediately satisfying? And I'm like, well, about what? I'm like, let's take anything. So you went to the bar last night and you went to a party and you drank way more than you should have. And you went home, you got a headache, and now you're feeling really bad, but you're at church. I'm proud of you. You're doing great. But like, did you choose what was ultimately important in that moment? Because what was ultimately important was probably you remaining in control of your body and in your mind and your emotions, not what was immediately satisfying, which was to just start drinking and not stop. And I think that we constantly feel like we're caught in the middle, right? We all do this. And the way out of that is not the pursuit of perfection. The way out of that is to say, I'm going to work to choose what's ultimately important more than I'm going to choose what's immediately satisfying. Just tip the scale, right? Just get it to where you're 51% ultimate versus 49% immediate. Like if that can be like the goal, then you get your life on a trajectory towards health. So the messy middle is somewhere I find myself every day. So if you feel like you're stuck in between those two things, give me a call. I'd love to talk about it.
It's such a good message in terms of the messy middle, because I think it kind of relates to a Viktor Frankl quote that I just pulled up. And it talks about that we all have the opportunity to make these decisions. He calls it the essence space. And he said, in that space is our power to choose. And in that choice is our freedom and our growth. And really it's this idea, right, that we can't trade what we want most for what we want now. Something that I actually have utilized, and I found it very effective in therapy, is taking two pieces of paper. And so, for instance, if somebody's struggling with something immensely, let's say it's drinking or pornography or something like that, I have them write out, like, what are they struggling with right now? What are they making bad choices in? And then I write out, like, if they're a believer, all right, what is God's way in this? What's the counter, right? And so they have two pieces of paper that have it, and I say, I want you to pick up, the bad choice right now. They pick up the piece of paper. Hey, did I make you pick that up? No, like you told me to, right? You maybe enticed me to, you prompted me to, but I'm the one that picked it up, right? So they have the power to choose. And it's a great imagery. And it's kind of what you're talking about in this messy middle space of, hey, which one are we choosing to pick up? Which one, if we picked up both, which one are we choosing to put down? And when you think of it in that sense, it's like, man, that can hit hard, right? That can hit home pretty good for me personally. When I think of this idea too of the messy middle, Carson, some people may be struggling and find themselves in that place of shame. Maybe they've made bad decision after bad decision, mistake after mistake. Their past is riddled with it. What's like just something encouraging that you could give them to help them know in the middle of this episode that there is an opportunity for change to take place in their life on the road ahead?
Yeah. One, I would say that I feel your pain, and that I have been where you have been. And you are not alone right now. And the truth in the matter is that Jesus is so transformative and so passionate about you that he's not giving up on you. Now, you can give up on him, and I would beg that you don't, but he is not giving up on you. Like, that's just not in the cards. The way that he treated his disciples, like, let's just take Peter for a second. I think this is so interesting. Peter is famous for denying Jesus 3 times. Three times that could have made him feel shame for the rest of his life. But after Jesus comes back from his short stint of being dead and he's made alive again, he walks up to the beach and he looks at Peter, and 3 separate times he tells Peter to go feed his sheep. And I love the symmetry there. For every time that Peter blew it, Jesus had a renewed calling on his life. And I think the same is true for you. For however many times that you've blown it, Jesus has a new identity for you, a new calling for you, and there's nothing that you can do to change that. The question is, will you take him up on his offer? Will you say, I'm going to follow you, and I'm going to discipline my body and my mind and my heart to choose your way? And I think that the big thing for you to know is there's a big difference between trying and training. So when you're just trying to do something, like you give it what you can, right, in the moment. But when you're training, you're doing today for the sake of what you're going to be able to do tomorrow. And that means that you're doing your very best today to walk in the way of Jesus, to pick up Jesus's hope as your own, and to walk in your new calling today, and believing that tomorrow you're going to be a little bit stronger. You're going to have a little bit more hope. You're going to have a little bit more confidence. And the truth in the matter is too, like, Jesus came to give you that new identity. So therefore insecurity can no longer be your source of decision making. Because if I'm to be really honest with all of you who are listening, I am one of the most insecure people on planet Earth. If you were to listen to this podcast to this point, or you were to watch a message that I've given on YouTube, you would probably say, that dude is pretty confident. He talks really loud and it's kind of annoying. And you would think all those things, right? But the truth of the matter is, when I get off this podcast here in a few minutes, I'm going to rethink everything that I said. And I'm going to feel insecure about some of the things that I said, because that's the thorn in my flesh that I'm fighting. And the only antidote to that lasts is saying, not my will, but your will, God. Like, I'm trusting you with everything, and I'm not going to hold anything for myself. And if you need some like encouragement in that, I would just go read Psalm 91 over and over and over again. Like, dwelling in the shadow of the Almighty God is the only safe place that we will ever find ourselves. And he welcomes you with open arms. Read the story of the prodigal son, right? It says that when the dad saw his son coming from a distance, he said, quickly, kill the fatted calf. Quickly. Like, there was no hesitation. It was, my son is home, and I'm proud that he is home, and I cannot wait to love my son. That's how God feels about you, no matter what you've done.
Man, Carson, that's so powerful, what you just mentioned. All of those, kind of the imagery, the scriptural references, the stories that really just bring us back to that idea that, you know, it's a Craig Rochelle quote from the book that you already mentioned. There's no sin too great for God's grace. There's no habit too big for his healing. There's no label too strong for his love. And I think back to Romans 11:29, which says the gifts and the call of God in your life are irrevocable, right? There's nothing that you have done that could possibly separate you from that gift or from that calling. There's nothing that you could possibly possibly do that could separate you from his love, Romans 8:38-39, right? This idea that God is who he says he is, that he remains faithful even when we are faithless. And that's the beautiful thing about God, the God that we serve, the God that we know. Carson, to the person out there today who maybe has found themselves struggling to maybe connect with God, attune themselves with God, attune themselves with what's the gifts, what is the calling, what is the purpose that God has called me to in this season of my life? How do I even stay consistent to something if I don't even know where I'm headed, right? What is the message that you'd give them, and maybe some practical steps to try to continually grow, build, and foster that relationship back with Christ?
Yeah. So back when I was in middle school, I promise this connects. I learned how to go scuba diving, and I was really small at the time, so they had to put a weighted vest on me to get me to sink to the bottom of the ocean.
Yep.
And I think that when I came back out of the water, I was like, oh, like I'm used to being weightless, so like the weighted vest like didn't really bother me in the water. But when I got on the boat, I'm like, what is on me right now? Like, I got to get this thing off. Like, I weigh 1,000 pounds, right? And I think that that's where we get in life. We accumulate weight after weight after weight with setback after setback after setback, and we never let it go. We never take the weighted vest off. And I think the invitation of Jesus is to trust that as we approach him, we can take the pressure vest off, so to speak.
That's right.
The pressure to perform and the pressure to have all the right answers. I think when pastors give like really ethereal messages and they don't give practicality, we all are like left wondering like, okay, what do we do next?
Right.
So I'll be really practical in my fundamental answer to your question. And this is what I do. It doesn't work for everybody, but I adore my system because it keeps me structured. I ask myself 3 questions every day. The first question is, where am I? And that is, what am I feeling? What am I experiencing? What am I struggling with? What am I excited about? What am I doing in life? A lot of times the first sentence is, where am I? I am at the coffee shop drinking a cup of coffee. Like, I try to make it as practical as I can. And then it goes into, I'm frustrated, or I'm sad, or I'm nervous about fill in the blank. Like, I just get radically honest. And then the second question that kind of comes out of that is like, what am I grateful for? Right. So I'm orienting myself to go, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm experiencing. And then right after that, I'm choosing to give thanks in all things, no matter what. Like, I do that every day. Like, what am I grateful for? And it starts sometimes on like the days that are hard. It's like, all I can figure out is like, I'm grateful for coffee, my wife and my kid and my dog. Like that's what I got.
Right.
But it's like that radical honesty reminds me about God's character, that he's compassionate towards me in those moments of uncertainty or frustration. And then the third question is, what am I asking God for? Or what am I praying for? And I just make a list. And the only rule that I have about those 3 questions is there are no rules about the responses. Meaning, if I've got 5 minutes that day, that means the answers are going to be really short, and I don't feel guilty about it, because the consistency of it is far more important to me than creating a system that is unsustainable. And that's how I feel like I enter back into God's presence each morning. And a good friend of mine, a pastor at our church, has a practice every morning I've been trying to apply recently. I would encourage you to do the same thing. Is that the first thing that you do when you wake up tomorrow morning from whenever you listen to this podcast, just say, good morning, Lord. Just 3 words. Good morning, Lord. Like, I make it simple. But that reorientation of your mind to say, God, I am going to go through this day with you. Going with God is far different than trying to live for God, right?
Yeah.
Like going with God is like, disciple me and teach me. If I've got to go for God or before the King and like prove myself, then that means I'm immediately disqualified.
Right.
But if I get to go with him, I get to go with Jesus, the one who provided everything for me. So it's just those 2 things I think are monumental to us saying, I'm gonna work my way back to doing life with God.
Going with God, not going for God. And I love those 3 questions. Where am I? What am I grateful for? What am I asking God for in this moment? And like you're saying, it's about the consistency, right? I interviewed a guy, a pastor named Tim Timberlake on the podcast not too long ago, and we kind of talked about similar types of things. And this is what he mentioned in terms of consistency. He said consistency is imperative because consistency compounds. Anything that we do consistently becomes a part of our habits and routines. And I truly believe there are very few things in this life that are as strong as a habit. And that's kind of exactly what we've been chatting about and kind of the encompassing theme within our conversation today. But Carson, man, I feel like I could unpack this type of stuff with you, I mean, for a long time. Don't you dare leave this conversation feeling insecure, because everything that you have said has been impactful to me, brother, and I appreciate it. But how I always love to really end our conversations or these interviews is just by allowing the guest to share maybe a pressing word that God has placed on their heart for such a time as this. And so today, Carson, maybe to the person listening, maybe feel stuck in that messy middle. Maybe they just feel like maybe their past has already disqualified them and there's no opportunity for change, right? That they're not worth it. They don't have the value in the eyes of the Lord. Maybe they're just stuck. Carson, what's the message that would hopefully spark some hope, encouragement, and motivation into their life that you want to leave us with today?
If that's where you are right now, if what Zach just said kind of describes the current place of your life, I have two words for you that I want you to know: that I love you and that I care about you. And I believe God has a calling on your life that someone needs to tell you.
Yeah.
Stop it. Stop believing the lies of the enemy. And yes, they are so compelling. He is the father of all lies. And when he lies, he speaks his native language, meaning he only lies. There is no truth in him. And you have got to stop listening to it. The truth in the matter is Isaiah 43. It's such a beautiful reminder for us every time we get to come back to it. Where the Lord says, forget the former things, for I am doing a new thing. And multiple translations, it says, behold, I am doing a new thing. And then you probably think when you hear the end of that sentence, like, God's doing a new thing in everybody else's life, but there's no way that he could do a new thing in my life. But what comes next proves that that is not true, that God wants to do a new thing in your life too. Because he says he's going to make a pathway in the wilderness and a stream in the wasteland, or a river in the dry and parched lands. And I love those two images. So if you feel like you're in the wilderness and you don't know your way out, or you feel like you're out in the middle of the desert and you are just hungry for a drop of water, the truth in the matter is the new thing that God wants to do is going to do both of those things. And he is going to give you everything that you need to do all the things that he wants you to do. And nothing can change that. And the decision is up to you of whether you're going to walk with God and trust his voice, or you're going to continue to live and to walk in the lies and the voice of the enemy. And I don't want you to do that. And I believe all of heaven is cheering you on and rooting for you to say, I'm going to trust that God's going to do something new, and it's going to be better than I can ever even fathom or imagine. And that's where my faith lies.
And it's that idea of doing something new in us while we walk with God, right, throughout the process. I love Isaiah 43, right, the first two verses that remind us that we're never alone in this fight. To the listener that's going to choose to embrace this process of progress, right, his words that he's speaking to his children: fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze, right? That is the God that we serve, a God who never leaves us alone in the midst of a fighting season. Carson, man, I just wanted to say again, thank you so much just for your time, for your willingness to join me for a conversation on the show. It has been truly a blessing and a gift to me and my heart. You have encouraged me, and I know you've encouraged all of our listeners as well. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for letting God just flow in and throughout your life.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. This has been such a privilege, and I want all of your listeners to know that I'm praying for you so deeply, and I believe in what you're doing, Zach. So thank you for your time.
I appreciate you, Carson.